Tonight we're going to hear from Dr. Dana Evans. Dana's been with us here at RIO since 2005, according to Professor Bonowitz. And women in medicine is something she's always been very interested in. So we were fortunate in last semester she was able to do a semester-long sabbatical, and we are now going to hear about your research.
Thank you very much. As you can see, I dressed for the occasion. I'm going to start stripping for the occasion too, because it is 100 degrees in here. Okay. We're going to start with the white coat. However, this is actually a very important garment of the doctor. I had a fight over these jackets with certain people in high position who wanted me to wear the short jacket. Short jackets are not doctors. The length of the jacket actually matters. So why do I have it titled The Unexpected? Honestly, as Lindley said, I was always interested in this. And it was very difficult to find any representation, especially in the 1980s when I was an undergrad. Actually, there was none. There was one right here. That is Dr. Blackwell, Elizabeth Blackwell. And when I went into this, especially with how I was treated in medical school, we were told we were unicorns, precious, and we might want to shut up our mouths so we don't get into trouble and get expelled. I expected to find maybe a dozen people. I found hundreds. My notes for this, just for the white women doctors, is 85,000 words of notes I took over the course of this semester. Okay, I've read over 120 articles and about 3 or 4 books. Okay? So we're going to jump right on into this. So out of that, what was I going to include? Do I include ancient Egypt? Because we had women doctors back then. Do I include the herbalists, which is where a lot of them got started? Do I talk about how the herbalists went to witches to dead? The men didn't go that same pathway. They got to be herbalists. Women got to be dead. Okay. Medieval period. There was an entire host of female doctors in medieval Italy, including Trotta. Do I include just one country, the whole world? And I really thought it was going to be the world, because I was expecting 12 people. Okay? Do I include the ones that pretended to be men? I had to make choices. So I only did North America, and actually for the talk, I'm only doing the United States. I had to kick poor Canada out. Okay, I just didn't have time. Modern medicine versus herbalists. Well, we're not going to talk about the herbalists too much, but we are going to talk about homeopathic medicine, which technically is herbalists. And you have no idea what modern medicine was in the time period we're talking. It isn't what you think it is today. It's terrifying. I will show you. I have picked the ones that did not hide their gender, because that's actually a completely different picture. If you lived your life as a man, there was going to be completely different expectations. Come on in, have a seat. I picked a time frame of 100 years. I picked a time frame of 100 years. Basically, a couple of years ahead of 1850, technically 1847. And I really am going to stop right around World War II. Again, I just couldn't cram it all in. But then we're going to talk traditional medical school versus the all-women's medical school, versus the sectarian medical schools, versus the eclectic, versus the homeopathic. And we still have that battle today. I still have students going, I don't want to be a DO, I want to be a real doctor. No, both real doctors. Okay? Allopathic medical school is what we mean when I say traditional, i.e. all male at the time period that we are talking. Why were we excluded from being doctors? We weren't allowed to be educated, period. We weren't allowed to go to college. Most women, if they even learned to read and write, did not go on. My great-grandmother was not literate. She did not know how to read and write because she was born in the 1880s, and women weren't educated. Their brains are too small. No, that's not a lie. That belief was held until almost the death of Einstein in the middle of the 20th century, when they cut open his skull against his wishes, and they found out, guess what? His brain's the same size as everybody else's. Okay? It turned out size of brain didn't matter. Then we're going to talk about They're restrictive clothing in our uteruses. I'm wearing the restrictive clothing I will demonstrate in a moment. The uteruses might freak out. That's not a lie. I'm going to talk about that. Societal norms. Women were wombs. Oh, they cleaned house too. Okay, that was their role. Men. For the men in the audience, if you think this is going to be an hour of male bashing, it's not. Okay. However, we have to talk about history, and history is messy. History is not always pretty. And we kind of started right around now, we're starting to try to hide the ugly history. We can't. We need to talk about it. But it's not going to be, an hour of me jumping on men. Okay? I have no idea why this is down in the corner. I have never seen that before in my life. And it's not over here. So I have no idea what's going on with this. So why were we excluded? There was actually, in the Science and Women in Question, in Popular Science back in 1882, was actually written by a woman trying to prove that we are mentally, physically, and morally inferior to men. Can't forget that Eve ate the apple. Okay? Adam ate it, we would celebrate his curiosity, but we ate it, so we are morally inferior. Great rebuttal. If we have time at the end, I'll bring it up. But basically, she pointed out this was the least scientific study she had ever seen in her life. Okay? However, remember that uterus thing? Dr. Edward Hammond Clark from Harvard wrote a 300-page book, Sex and Education, to prove women are dumb. In fact, we're too stupid to educate, period. And it would actually damage our uterus. I don't know what his evidence for uterine damage was. Okay? I was really curious, but I'm not curious enough to pick up a 150-year-old book and start reading. Dr. Mary Putnam Jacoby refuted it the next year. Sadly, because of time, I had to cut poor Mary out of the talk. Okay? Poor Mary. So let's talk about that clothing. Okay, take a look at those waists. What are they wearing? They're wearing this. They're wearing a corset. Now, can I bend over in this thing? Want to watch? Yeah. Yep. That's it, man. I can't get down. And yes, I do have on 3 or 4 petticoats, and I would actually have had metal down here to help lift them to get them out of, the horse apples and crap. Literally in the streets. By the way, those are my great-grandmothers. That is Madalena over there with my grandfather Antonio, and that is Conchetta. I kind of noticed that my dress looks a lot like hers. Okay? That's an accident. But you can see the size of their bosoms and their hips versus that waist. You know how tight they have to have that thing waisted? I do not have this tight, because I need to breathe. I need to breathe and talk. Okay, so it's not on that, but this is very restricted. So if I sat in that chair and tried to bend over to look at a patient, I am going to be restricted. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay. Why do I have this outfit? I did not buy this for this. I made the hat for this, but I didn't buy this for this. This is my steampunk outfit that, Melinda is going to see in a couple weeks, because I'll probably wear it to the con. So, this is traditional medicine at the time. This is a Civil War kit. These are bloodletters. These aren't these little things, those are blades. We put that to your skin, we slice you with multiple razor blades, and bled you into these cups. I have no idea what was in that thing. Okay? That's a pill maker. That probably poured out caustics and purgatives. What are purgatives? Purgatives, they either make you vomit out your illness or poop it out the other side. Okay? And caustics, they would blister your skin. They would give you mercury and arsenic as treatments. Frankly, modern medicine back then was just as likely to kill you as cure you. I mean, they did kill President Washington with one of these. Okay? Homeopathic and women's colleges were herbal treatments. And these days, most of our medicine is what? Herbal. Even the medicine you go to CVS and Walgreens to buy, most of them have a botanical origin. Not all of them, but a lot of them. World War I is where we start seeing the traditional medicine that we think of today, our white-coated doctors of today. By the way, the white coat does go back to the medieval period. It is a long-standing garment. World War I. The wars. The 2 great wars gave us modern medicine. It's I guess, a silver lining on war. Not really much of a silver lining. So who came first? The one that I first heard of was Elizabeth. Well, Now, Elizabeth came around, and you see her dates. She was born in Bristol, England. And she had two sisters, Emily and Ellen. And when I started this, and I put this in my blog that this is going to be my research study, somebody popped up, have you read the Sisters Blackwell? And I mean, sisters? I learned about her in 1986. I tutored her for 3 years because nursing students had to take women in history because of sexism. It was a useless class as far as nursing was concerned. But they had to take it because they were women. And I think I got this button wrong. Anyhow, never heard of Ellen until last year. Not Ellen, Emily. Ellen became a writer. Emily became a doctor. Never heard of her. Anyways, they came to the United States after their sugar plantation burned down in Jamaica. Her family were abolitionists. And you're going to see the white women doctors had four things in common. They tended to be wealthy, or at least upper middle class, such as there was. They were almost all abolitionists. They were almost all in the temperance movement, and we'll talk about why later. And they were all women's suffrage. Okay? Obviously, if they were thinking in the society norms, they never would have thought to be a doctor. Dad moved them around a lot because he was apparently a bad businessman. He died of malaria, and Elizabeth wanted to go home. By the way, I will have quotes over here. I'm not going to read them all out because at times a thing that I don't have. So you can read them. I couldn't figure out what print would look good, so I picked that. I don't know if it looks good, but it's certainly bigger than the other stuff. So she went back. She wanted to go back to England, but then she met William Henry Channing. He was an abolitionist. He was a big supporter of women's rights, but he was also a Unitarian, which is a Christian belief, but they kind of bring in Judaism and they bring in Buddhism, they bring in all kinds of other beliefs. Okay, they host the pagan thing over there in Athens all the time these days.
Unitarian Universalists.
Universalists, correct. Yes, and that's kind of what these ones were, yes. And the Transcendentalists. They kind of thought they conducted the dead, okay? So, he converted them to this. But these were out-of-the-box thinkers. He was so charming, okay? They followed him to Boston. They did not go back to England. So, at that time, as the story goes, and the story is in Elizabeth's own words, she did write her own autobiography. And her mother had a friend who was dying of uterine cancer. As somebody who had that, I can kind of relate. But she said it was worse being treated by the doctors than it was to be dying of uterine cancer. And you have to keep in mind here, women of this time period, let me look how far down my dress goes. Do you see an ankle here anywhere? You do not, because you would not. They even covered up legs on furniture. You know those cute little like chef's hats on the side of turkey legs? You always see them in the pictures? That came out of the Victorian era, where you could not see anything on a body part. There was deep body shame. And a woman being seen by a man who was not her husband was shameful, and that included the doctor. Many of these women would die before they would see a doctor for their breasts or their uterine problems. Okay? So she asked Elizabeth, why don't you be a doctor? Elizabeth was not into this. She didn't want to be a doctor. She kind of thought bodies were gross. But she had Channing over there. She had a few other Transcendentalists, some Quakers, because the Quakers were big. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Kind of pushing her to think. And she said, I'll do it. She applied to 20 medical schools. Shockingly, they all turned her down. Okay? I applied to over 20 and I only had 2 that said yes, so I get you. Women were excluded from a higher education. By the way, I need to say this right now. Medical school, at this time period in 1840s, you did not need a college education. You didn't even need a high school education. Frankly, you could be self-taught and hang out your shingle and say, I'm a doctor. The idea of doctors, idea of boards, idea of that kind of regimentation didn't come until after World War I. Okay? So she could have gone. She didn't need to go to college. She didn't have to worry about being excluded from college. But women dissecting, unthinkable. Should you go to Paris? Paris was liberal. Paris is still liberal. Okay? That was what she was, actually Dr. Warren here said, go to Paris or dress up and live your life as a man. She didn't want to do that. Either of these things. She didn't want to go to Paris. Why? What was going on there? England and France were fighting. Okay? That's the whole time of the, French Revolution. People were lopping off heads left and right. Okay, I'm not sure I'd go to Paris either. But he's a Quaker, Dr. Warren. And Quakers believe in the equal rights of women and equal education of women, even in that time period. They are pretty much the reason those all medical schools that we're going to talk about at the very end of this, that's why they exist, Quakers. All the schools in Philadelphia turned her down. All the schools in New York City turned her down. Geneva College in New York said yes. However, they thought it was a joke. Joke's on them. They asked the student body, can we bring a woman in? It was so unthinkable, they thought it was a joke. They all voted yes. And then she showed up, and they went insane. They just freaked. But they did not expel her. She graduated, she wrote her doctorate on typhus, she worked in the docks of New York, working with typhoid fever, okay, working with typhus, working with other shipborne diseases. She wrote a thesis, she graduated at the top of her class. Notice it's only 2 years, it's only a 2-year education. Actually, it was about 3 13-week educations, okay, kind of less than what we expect of an ASN these days, right? Okay? Or even, this is not much for my nursing students here. You're going to school longer than what she went as to be a doctor. After her, Geneva said no more. There was so much trouble, Geneva banned them. That's going to become important later. So she then went to England and France to continue her education. Some of the best medical schools in the world were in Edinburgh, Scotland. She met Florence. Her and Florence had an instant friendship. They were very, very much bosom buddies, constantly together, until they disagreed of what's the future of medicine. They couldn't reconcile themselves. They parted ways. Elizabeth went on to work at the Martinet de Paris, Port Royal, which is a lying-in hospital. Here's another thing that you probably can't even wrap your head around. Women could not go to a hospital, not as a doctor, not as a nurse, not even as a patient. They were excluded. Women and children could not go and be treated at a hospital, unless it was a lying-in hospital. And those were usually for after childbirth. Just make sure you didn't die of childbed fever. Okay? She syringed the baby with ophthalmia neonatorum, which is gonorrheal conjunctivitis, gonorrheal pink eye. Now, this is a time where we don't have masks, we don't have gloves, we don't have goggles. She syringed, splashed it into her own eye, got gonorrhea of her own eye. She ended up being enucleated, which means they took her eye out to save her body. And she could not be a surgeon because she didn't have medical perception. So she had a glass eye through her entire medical practice. So you see she's kind of young and cute here. If you look at some of her older pictures, you'll notice one eye's not focusing. It's because it's a glass eye. She did come back to New York in 1851. Found it very hard to set up practices because you could not do a clinical rotation in a hospital as a woman. And who was going to go to a woman to be seen? Well, as it turns out, we'll talk about that. Her sister Emily showed up to follow in her footsteps. Geneva said no. So this is Emily. She was accepted to Rush Medical College, and I do believe that that one's probably a homeopathic school. Could not find anything much about it, but it was enough that the Illinois Medical Society, i.e. basically sort of the local doctor, society, said no way. They censored the school for impropriety. And they weren't going to deal with anyone who went to that school. They kicked her out. Look where she went, Cleveland. Western Reserve, that's Case Western nowadays. By the way, they took more than one woman. Okay, they were actually kind of forward thinking to go Ohio. Whoa, my hat fell off. That doesn't usually happen. Now I'm going to try to let me get that thing. Huh? Let's put that back on. See what things that can happen? Probably lay it right in patient. They usually score 10 out of 10. It's perfect. She got an 11 because she was so exemplary of a student. Yeah, she was something else. She graduated with honors. Guess what? She went back to Edinburgh as well to train. She trained with Sir James Simpson, who was really big on an obstetrician, pioneering the use of chloroform. Went to London, went to Paris, went to Berlin, went to Dresden, just kept on studying. She also befriended Florence, who wanted her to go join her in the Crimean War in Turkey, but she said, no, I want to go back with my sister. Now this quote we are going to look at, I'm going to just sum this up. Basically, again, could not go do a residency because you can't do clinicals. So you could not really be a doctor without doing clinicals. So the doctors were joking and mocking them and said, well, if you don't like it, make your own hospital. So they did. Okay. This is still there. This is 64 Bleecker Street in New York City. This was their hospital. It is now pricey housing. And those are apartments these days. Okay. Which is good because I was kind of dreading going to Boston, Philadelphia, or New York City to see these buildings. And I realized that there are apartment complexes now, but there's nothing left to see. Okay, so I didn't go. I just took a picture off the internet. So they made their own. This becomes pivotal down the line. The hospital was $4 a week if you could pay. It was free if you couldn't. In 8 months, look how many patients they saw. Who would see a woman doctor? Other women who didn't want men looking up their skirts. You have to understand, up until the mid-1800s, who delivered babies? Midwives, women. The doctor saw there was money to be made, and they took it away from the midwives, outrightly writing laws to prevent midwifery. Yeah? So they stole it away from the women, and the women didn't know where to turn. A lot of women were trying to give birth on their own at home with, relatives. Yeah? That's how my grandmother did it. My great-grandmother did it. Yeah? Because they didn't have a lot of hospitals to go to. So these women doctors had a niche, OBGYN, because no one else wanted them. No one else wanted to see him. No men wanted to see him. Yeah. So Elizabeth did return to England eventually. She started an all-women's school in England. And she also helped to start NHS, which is National Health System, which they still use in the UK today. Emily started in the New York Medical College for Women, one that her and her sister helped to make, with their hospital being where you did what? Residencies, clinicals. Yeah, became very important. Emily ended up being the dean of this college until it was actually taken in by Cornell. Right around the 1900s, right around World War I, a lot of other schools started letting women in. So the all-women medical schools, their usefulness declined. The Elizabeth Blackwell Medal is still awarded, and I found it for 2023. Didn't find it for 2024, though again, I forgot to go back and look. I just realized there was something. You're going to see a slide where it says insert something. I haven't inserted it. I just remembered that. Yay. But before Elizabeth, there was Harriet. Harriet Kezia Hunt. So why didn't I put her first? Her dates are earlier. She didn't go to medical school. She got out of medical practice without ever going to medical school, because she could do that then. But in the 1830s, her sister Sarah nearly died. The doctors were in there with the purgatives, the caustic blistering. They were running mercury douches into her uterus. If that didn't kill her, I'm sure it was going to cure her, right? Okay? Leeches. Leeches do have a use medically. Oh, the only thing they do. I've used them. They do. But not so much that mercury douche. She learned her cures from a homeopathic medical school. Actually, she learned it from Elizabeth Mott and her husband, who had their own homeopathic school. And together they all formed one. And they opened it up. She saved her sister's life. Her and her sister followed the Motts for years. And they basically specialize in neurasthenia, which is a garbage bag term for women problems. And it's something doctors didn't want to deal with. I don't know, maybe they're hysteric, maybe their womb's walking off one night. No, they thought that. They thought our wombs jumped out of our bodies, ran around at night, and jumped back in. If mine jumped out, they could have kept on going, okay? I would not have wanted that thing back. Just bye-byes. They made the Women's Physiologist Society in 1843. Now, this is 4 years before Elizabeth went to school. In 1 year, 454 women joined. Think about that. This is a time period where they think women are too dumb to read a newspaper without fainting. That's how many women were interested in science. So they always had an interest. She did apply. The same year Elizabeth went to Geneva, she applied to Harvard. Harvard said no. You can see their views up here. So she applied, after seeing Elizabeth's success, she reapplied to Harvard in 1850 and was accepted. Along with 2 African-American men, the faculty and the students freaked out so hard they expelled them in 3 days, all 3 of them. Harvard did not take another woman until World War II forced its hand in 1945. And that was on a 10-year contingent basis because they weren't convinced women were smart enough to be doctors. 100 years of women being doctors, Harvard still didn't think we were smart enough to be a doctor. They do take us now, they do. But that was a fight. That was a long, hard fight. Okay? She, again, like I said, they were all suffragettes. She threw a women's rights convention expecting a couple women. 1,000 showed up to this first convention. Reminds me of the Moonville Tunnel. They expected 300 people, 2,000 showed up, and we had no room. Yeah, Elizabeth was there, and Tim was there with me. Yeah, we're stuck here for hours. She was so influential in medicine that the Philadelphia all-female medical school gave her an honorary degree, saying, yes, you really are a doctor. But I would have loved her. Because in 1853, she told Boston, I ain't paying your taxes because I can't vote. And taxation without representation is tyranny. Would have loved her. Probably would have gone to prison with her, but you know. She even threw herself a silver wedding anniversary with Miss Harriet K. Hunt and Dr. Harriet K. Hunt. She exchanged rings with herself to symbolize her marriage to her profession. 1,500 people showed up for this party, including 3 generations of patients, to tell you how important this woman was in that area. This is her grave. That is Hygeia, the goddess of medicine, which is where we get the word hygiene. Okay. My students are used to me translating all the useless Greek. Okay. That's where hygiene comes from, was a goddess. Her face is kind of gone. That's the environmental science problem right there. Okay. So I wasn't going to do Myra, so hopefully I'm going to blast through Myra real quick so I can hit that, so I don't go tremendously over 1 hour. So, first doctor in Ohio. That's why I left her. So she was actually born in England as well, but she was in East Liverpool. That's where I kind of grew up, very close to East Liverpool. Married a doctor, and he got sick. And he was dying. Took him a long time to do so. She studied all his books, was inspired by her nursing of him. She went to school at the Central Medical College, which is a homeopathic school. Okay? Became Cleveland's first female doctor. She became so important that she was practicing homeopathic medicine. John D. Rockefeller, I think we all know who he is. The Rockefeller Center in New York. He was a patient of hers. Okay? That's how important she was. She did treat soldiers in the Civil War. She made the Cleveland Homeopathic College for Women, became the Cuyahoga County's women suffrage president, and she actually made another female and children's hospital in New York. Not New York, Cleveland. With her daughter-in-law, who's also a doctor, Dr. Eliza Merrick. Then we have Clements here. Clements Lozier came up in Virginia with the Native Americans. Her mother learned herbal medicine from the Native Americans in Virginia, and she followed her mother, learned it at her mother's side. Must have been a quick study, because look how early she was. She was actually orphaned. That's okay. Children in this time period would have been working 5 years already. Okay? They put children as young as 6 and 7 to work. At age 17, she married Abraham Lozier. Just like Myra, her husband got sick, and she nursed him, studying his medical books. And she started teaching A&P and pathology and hygiene out of her house. Her brother says, go to medical school. She went to that same school Myra went to. Okay? She got a second medical degree at the Syracuse Electric College, and she founded the homeopathic school for medicine for women, the most important one in the United States. But she was not just an OBGYN, which most of these women doctors I want to mention, that's what they were. They were OBGYNs. Okay? They're basically glorified midwives, a lot of them, to be perfectly honest. She did surgery. She did over 120 known capital operations, which means big operations, mostly removing tumors, usually uterine ones and breast tumors. But she could hustle. 50 patients a day, she earned the equivalent of $1.5 million a year. Okay? This woman knew how to make money. The other ones did not. Most of them died in poverty. Okay. Along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Is Miss Cady over here? No. She's somewhere else too. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for those of us who've never heard her name, she was one of the most important suffragettes. Okay. They made the New York. There's 3 main all women's colleges. One in Boston, one in New York, one in Philly. More cropped up. I did not expect that. I knew those 3. Almost every city had several. I didn't know that. Okay. I'm not going to talk about that. I am going to talk about the first 3. This one trained over 200 women, just out of this school, in 10 years. And I'm not going to read the whole quote here from Katie, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But basically she says the doctors were so angry at how good she was at surgery that they actually tampered with her patients, trying to prove that was medical malpractice, to shut her down. They failed. They utterly failed. She was not shut down. And then we have Maria Elizabeth Zaszruska. And I'm just going to call her Dr. Zach because that is one heck of a last name. Thank you, Poland. Okay? She is from Poland. Her father was nobility. Her mother ended up being a midwife because father lost his lands to Russia, went to Germany to work, lost that position, came to the United States. Actually, he didn't come to the United States, she did, because she was working as a midwife with her mother. She wanted to go to midwifery school. She was repeatedly rejected because teenagers didn't go to college. Late 20s, early 30s, early 40s, they went to college. She was too young, but Dr. Joseph Smith saw how good she was with her mother, admitted her. She was the youngest woman to attend, ever. He was so impressed with her, with Marie, that he made her the equivalent of a professor at that university. And there was huge debate. She's too young and she's female. He did it anyways. She had 200 students under her, including men. Within hours of her taking her position, he died. They forced her out in a matter of 6 months because they did not want her there. Disillusioned, she came to the United States with her sister, figuring, Germany kind of sucked, I'm going to leave. Maybe it'll be better in the United States. She met the Blackwells, because that's how important they were. Everybody knew them. And they took such a shine to her, they said, we're going to give you private English lessons. We want to see you go to school. And she did. Case Western Reserve. Well, Western Reserve College then. But she came here. That's the 3rd one we talked about that came from Ohio. She completed her residency at the Blackwells, that infirmary I showed you on Bleecker Street. And then she went on to Boston, to the Boston's New England Female Medical College. She was a professor there of obstetrics. Okay? But she actually got to a fight with Dr. Gregory, who founded the university. He wanted to keep it basically OBGYN. She goes, no, we need to be more progressive. We need to be more like a traditional male school. They fought, she lost, she left. Okay? So she went to establish the New England Hospital for Women and Children. So at least that the women could have a place to do their residency. That they didn't have to travel to either New York City or to Philadelphia to do so. Because let's face it, Boston's an enormously important city in the 1800s. Okay, it's still there, that place that she founded. It's now the Dimmock County Health. I will not get to talk much about Dr. Dimmock, another female doctor. Okay, but it's not named after her, probably because nobody could spell that. Okay. This is the first hospital in Boston and the second in the United States, completely run by women. All the doctors were women, all of them. All the administrators were women. Also opened the first professional nurse training in 1872. You got to keep in mind that nurses were not what? They weren't trained. They were camp followers. They were housewives. They showed up. I mean, Florence Nightingale was one of the first to really kind of figure out, the aseptic techniques that we use today. They didn't really have them. Okay, so Marie was not able to be part of the Massachusetts Medical Society. No woman was. And in fact, if you were a man who was in the society and you helped a woman, you weren't in the society no more. You got ostracized. And these are important. This is your networking. This is your business networking. This is where you get patients. This is where you get legal representation. Okay? All that kind of thing. it didn't exist for the women. They weren't allowed in. They aren't going to be allowed in for another almost 40 years, okay, or more. She became the president of the female version of this. Along with Emily Blackwell, I won't get a chance to talk about Helen Major, Mary Putnam Jacoby. They sent a letter to Harvard saying, we want you to make a medical profession for women. We want you to train women doctors. We've got monies. Harvard said, nope. However, John Hopkins went bankrupt. And the daughters of some of the trustees, including Mary Elizabeth Garrett here, she had railroad money. She had railroad money. Take a look at that. That's what today's equivalent of. That's how much money they offered Harvard, and Harvard said no. So they gave it to John Hopkins. John Hopkins is like, I take the money and let women in, or I go bankrupt and close my doors. Guess what they did? They took women. They blackmailed them. But look at what they did. Remember what I said? Anybody could just walk in and call themselves a doctor. No school, including the male schools, had really any entrance requirements. Marie and those other women doctors came up with this. You had to be, whether you're male or female, to get into medical school, you needed to have a bachelor's. You needed to speak French, German, Latin, as well as English. You had to have chemistry, physics, and biology. What do you still need to get into medical school? Chemistry, physics, and biology. And the John Hopkins professors joked, thank God we're professors. We could never have gotten in as a student. They didn't have that. And unfortunately, that was picked up a little bit later by the Flexner report. Dr. Flexner came out with about another 15 years or so down the line, basically trying to get medical schools more standardized. And he picked up on this. But if women couldn't go to undergrad, how could they get a bachelor's degree? So that actually kind of led to a rapid decline in women. We had about 25% women going to medical school right around the 1890s. After World War I, it dropped down to less than 10% and remained there until about the 1970s and 1980s when I went to medical school. She did retire. Mary Edward Walker, I debated, she really didn't have the huge impact on the schools as everybody else, but Mary was hysterical. I had to put her in, and she did do something that is worthy of being in here. Not that she was born in New York, but her father, Dr. Alva, a self-taught doctor, he had big beliefs in equal rights for women and equal education. Educated all 5 of his daughters. He thought this restrictive clothing was too much. Notice she's wearing pants. Do you know it's illegal to wear pants as a woman back then? Did you know that they've made it illegal in some places now to have short sleeves like I have on under here? Yeah. The last couple of years, regulating what women wear. So she went to jail multiple times wearing men's clothes. Now I said I wasn't going to put men in, but she did go to school as a woman. Okay? She did go to school as a woman. She never hid the fact she was not a trans man. She did not hide the fact that she was a woman. She actually had to earn her, she taught at school for a few years, got herself some money, went to Syracuse, the first school to actually accept men and women equally into a traditional school. Okay? Only woman in her class, again, 3 13-week courses. I actually have all kinds of data, like how much things cost. I have their curriculum. I could show you our syllabus. Okay? I have all this. I just don't have time in it, and it's not that exciting. But you can see the price. She actually wore trousers and a jacket to her own wedding. She was not going to wear a constrictive wedding dress. Her wedding to Albert didn't last too long. She kept her own name. In fact, she was a huge advocate of keeping your own name. And she did not think women should take their husbands' names. That's still not the really interesting part of her. They set up a joint practice. It didn't go well because, again, they didn't like the man working with a woman. And she moved out to Iowa because she wanted a divorce from him. And the West was looser on divorce. On the East Coast, you couldn't get a divorce for anything. Women could, men could. You know, if he says you were cheating, he'd divorce you, or just put you in the insane asylum, whatever came first. And you did not have to have cause to put your wife in a mental asylum. You could just drop her off and say she's nuts, and they'd take her in. Okay, Bull Run, Battle of Bull Run. She goes, I want to join the army and help. Guess what the army said? No. But her superior said she deserves to be commissioned. So she organized a relief for the women of, orphans of the war, went back and got a second degree, another medical degree. She got 2 medical degrees. From the high geotherapy, that's water cure. I mean, that is really kind of buckus, okay? But it wasn't then. She came back, and they actually did. She was actually appointed as the surgeon of the Army in the 52nd Ohio Infantry, stationed out of Chattanooga. She's the first female surgeon in the Army, which is why I included her. It's still not why I included her. Okay, so she did want people to know that women fought in the war. Okay, we're right now expunging that from the record. Dr. Marin, the director of the Army's medical service, said she's a medical monstrosity because, a female, oh my gosh. She couldn't know more than a housewife. She proved him wrong. Okay, she was then taken prisoner by the Confederacy. You can see what they said about her. They must have really she must have had a mouth on her. Okay, she must have been a blast. They did trade her back to the Union. The Union finally gave her a salary after she survived all those months in a prison. They hadn't been paying her. She was just basically working for free. So they did start paying her. And at the end, General William Tecumseh Sherman, who is famous, okay, George Thompson, told Andrew Johnson she deserves the Congressional Medal of Honor. She's the only woman to win. Okay, so she had that. She's wearing it. Well, notice that she's not dressed as a woman anymore, because she is now the president of the National Dress Reform, and she just started dressing as a man. She never acted like a man. She didn't want to be a man, but she wanted to dress like one. I can't blame her. This versus that. Okay? Yeah, I think that too. All right, she actually worked with Susan B. Anthony. She is the one who started the women's suffrage here in Ohio, working for equal rights for women, equal work for women, equal pay for women, and divorce laws. If you're getting beat by your husband, let's get you out of this situation. Because at this point, you were getting beat by your husband, what did the cops do? They came and said, why are you annoying your husband? Okay, stop annoying him, he won't beat you. And we know that's not how that works. She did write 2 books on feminism. And in 1916, the government asked for their Medal of Honor back, and she basically, okay, no way. She said, over my dead body. She would not give it back. She held on to it. She kept that medal. Okay. She was protesting there in 1919, fell down the steps and died of her injuries. She was 88. Guess what? How many years later? 60 years later? They said, oh yeah, she was the victim of sexual discrimination. Let's give her back her Medal of Honor. By the way, I did not know this until I was looking up, stealing pictures off the internet, like we do. She had her own quarter last year. If I would have known that, I'd have been searching every quarter for the last year looking for this. Okay? I would have went to the bank and asked. Did not know this until like last week that she has her own quarter. Now I'm done talking about the privileged white women. Let's talk about the women of color. I wanted this to be intersectional because they were there too. And I would love to tell you that they went to the medical schools without a problem because women were helping women. No. No. They faced all kinds of prejudice. Look at her dates. We're in the middle of the Civil War. But they did take her into the New England Medical School for women. This is Rebecca Lee Crumpler. At this time, 54,000 doctors in the United States, 300 of them in 1860 were women. I told you I was expecting 12. There was 300 that we know of. She had to work her way through. It took her longer because she had to work. She had to take a 7-month leave of absence because her husband died. She was almost not taken back. They're like, no, you were out too long. They did take her back. She worked for the Freedmen's Bureau, which worked with the emancipated slaves, because A, no white doctor would treat a black patient. And we're talking about people who now have to learn all sorts of things. What did she teach? Hygiene, nutrition, and medicine. Now, she couldn't go to any hospital because she's a woman and she's black. Pharmacy, same deal. She moved to Boston hoping to find a little bit less prejudice because the North wasn't quite as bad as Virginia. Yeah. She did find it a little better, but still, obviously, there's going to be prejudice. By the way, this picture and this picture, we're not 100% that is Rebecca Lee Crumpler. They think actually that these pictures, which are attributed to her, are not her. But that's a nurse, Mary Mahoney. We don't know. You're going to notice I have a lot less on her than I do on all those other women. Why? Because nobody documented anything people of color did. Okay? Now, she did set up her own practice on 67 Joy Street. She is the first African-American, male or female, to write a medical book in 1883. Here it is. Okay? Sort of a what to expect, what you're expecting. And then the other part is basically psychiatry for women. Depression, postpartum, that kind of stuff. She died of fibroid tumors, so was it fibroids and she bled to death, or got an infection, or did she have uterine cancer? Who knows? She was buried along with her husband in an unmarked grave. 125 years later, they finally pulled together and gave her her own gravestone. This is 67 Joy Street. It is now a stop on the Boston Women's Heritage. This, by the way, will cost you upwards of $3,000 to $4,000 a month rent to live inside of that apartment complex these days. It's on Beacon Hill. It's a rich area of Boston, if we're not familiar. We actually do have the Rebecca Lee Society. Okay, so she does have this legacy. And actually, in 2019 and in 2021, both Virginia and Boston have a Rebecca Lee Crumpler Day in her honor. We also have the Rebecca Lee Pre-Health Society for women of color, of diverse backgrounds, to go on to healthcare professions. And then we have Eliza Ann Greer. I don't have much on Eliza, but she went from slave to doctor. Okay, and so did her brother, by the way. She was emancipated as an infant. Her brother was a little bit older. Moved to Nashville to study teaching at Fisk University. And she decided she really wanted to be a doctor. She also had to work her way through, because $55, $2,000 would have been well beyond the means of somebody of color at that point. Okay, so we have her over here. This is a statement from her letter. She wrote to the Philadelphia College going, "Can I come? I will work my way through as long as you let me in." They did. And she did. Took her 7 years to do what everybody else was doing it too, but she did it. She is the first female African American to get a job in Georgia. She went to Atlanta. Her brother practiced there. And basically, this was some of her reasoning. She saw all these black midwives delivering babies, but the white doctor's taking all the fees. She goes, "Why should I deliver for somebody else what I can do on my own?" So she did. She unfortunately died very young. She got very, very ill. She had to ask for money, so they gave it to her. Suzanne Lafleche-Picault, Native American. Her father was a chief. Her story was she saw an elderly woman die because no white doctor would come to the reservation. She was sent to an all-girls school in Jersey. Don't know if it was one of those infamous Indian schools, but it only had freed slaves and Native Americans. She went to the Philly school, graduated top of her class. They loved her, wanted her to stay. She goes, "No, I'm going home to the reservation." That's the reservation. She took care of over 1,200 people in a huge thing. She worked 20 hours a day. She slept 4. Somehow she managed to find time to have kids. Okay, not sure how. By the way, you could not legally work if you were married. You could not legally work if you had children. She said, "Screw that." Okay, she kept working. She was in the temperance movement. We have to understand, we can look back and say the temperance movement, oh, that's bad. I mean, look what they did with the mob, okay? You got to remember that when people drink, they tend to get more violent. And again, there's no way that these women had any way to get out of a marriage that was abusive, but they knew if their husbands weren't drunk, they wouldn't get beaten as bad. And there'd be some money in the house, okay? So not only that, the government flooded their reservations. If they're drunk, they can't hold on to the land. You can grab all the land you want. She saw this. She did fight for Native American land rights. Okay? She, sanitation, food health. She eventually died, but she said that being a woman was much more a hindrance than being Native. Margaret Chung, first Chinese. Look at her dates. Just a few years before she was born, we had the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. It's the only act of Congress that we've had that excludes a specific group. We see it every day. We can turn on the news, we see it. We demonize one group, blame everything on them. Those immigrants, those people stealing our jobs. I mean, it's the same dance. It's been the same dance for centuries. We actually had paperwork. So her parents came over, who knows why. They couldn't work. Her father got hit by a car, could not be treated at a hospital because he was Chinese. She did go to school. Only woman in her class, she dressed up as a man because she couldn't get a residency, so she started calling herself Mike. I understand that. I had to take Women's Medical Association off my resume to get a single phone call, okay? Because Dana could be either or, 100 and some years later. She did go to Chicago, founded the American Women's Medical Association that still exists today, I remember. She went and opened her own practice, but she was not a OB/GYN, she was an emergency surgeon and a plastic surgeon. She did celebrities like Mary Pickford, one of the early movie stars. Okay? She was prominent in World War II. She was Mama Chang. And all these soldiers depended on her. She actually came up with the WAVE, which is Woman Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service. She established it. Could not be a member because she was Chinese. Closer to home, Starling, Columbus, Ohio Medical School. They all became OSU. Did you see they graduated women, mostly in the 1880s. This is the house, this is Gallipolis. This is actually right here on 3rd Avenue. Jeanette and Mamie Emerson, I did tell the John G. Church down there that I would include them. They are two African-American sisters. They were chiropodists, which is the early form of what I am, podiatrist. And I was a surgeon. They were not. They mostly dealt with corns, calluses, working on shoes, that kind of thing. They worked there for over 20 years. The house still stands. And the debt we owed to the LGBT community. Shockingly, a lot of these women were lesbians. Okay? Listen, Emily Blackwell, Maria. I didn't get a chance to talk about Lucy or Susan or Sarah. She's the one who fought Typhoid Mary. Louisa Garrett Anderson, they were all lesbians. And actually, there's a lot of evidence that Florence Nightingale and Elizabeth Blackwell were lovers. Okay? So their fight was probably more than just over the way medicine went. Most of them married other female doctors. Emily met Dr. Kushner. They raised a daughter together. Marie went to Boston, found Dr. Julia Sprague. They were together 40 years. I didn't get to talk about Sophia Jacques-Blake. She is from the UK, first doctor in the UK. She was going to go with Lucy, but had to go back. She married somebody else. When I say marry, I mean Boston marriage. You know, a lot of these women went to the Boston school. It's where we get the word Boston marriage. Okay? It was pretty easy to be a lesbian in Boston at that time. Easy with giant quotes on it, right? I gotta talk about the schools real super quick because we're running out of time. The female medical school, this is supposed to be the first one. Philly and Boston argued back and forth who was the first. It was actually started by Dr. Samuel Gregory, but it was actually the American Medical Education Society. It did not become an actual medical school until 10 years later. So was it really a medical school in 1848? We'll talk about that, but Maria was there. There's the school. That's where Dr. Lee came from, Dr. Lee Crumpler. I didn't get to talk about Mary Harris Thompson. She's really important. I mean, she actually made this hospital. It burned down in the Great Chicago Fire. She had to build it all again. And in the meantime, she was treating people in her house who got burned in the fire. Dr. Morton, very, very important OB/GYN. This is the school in Philly. This is also, this school, Nale, high-end apartments, they're all high-end apartments now. This is the one in Philadelphia, founded in 1850. Okay, it was the Female Medical College. It was renamed 17 years later. So is it the first? It says I'm the first because you were just a society in 1848. Does it matter? No. The men argued these were not equal. and they weren't wrong. These really were just teaching OBGYN and herbal treatments. They were not the allopathic medical schools. I did not know that until I started this. Okay? But I have to talk about the 700. They actually, a hospital said, yes, you can come to clinicals. 700 men showed up to harass these women, scream at them, throw things at them, spit on them. And so did some of the faculty. And some of the other doctors. It was so bad, it made the news. And the news were like, what is wrong with you? What if this was your mother or your sister or your daughter? Okay? What is wrong with you? Well, the men didn't like that, so they wrote up a whole list of reasons why women, and they published that in a different paper. Okay? It's too shocking for us to look at men. And we can't control yourself. I saw a lot of naked men in my practice. Let me tell you, I can control myself. Okay? Like, yep, no. You know? That's what they thought of women. I mean, they thought that we were the ones who had sexual urges that we could not control. It went against the interests of society. Of course it did. Because they weren't stuck at home doing nothing but raising children and making dinner. The women's schools weren't good enough. I will be honest, that actually is a legitimate criticism. They weren't. They weren't the same. But that's what Maria, Dr. Zach, wanted to change. Okay? By the way, notable Dr. Rebecca, second black woman. There's Elijah. This one here, that is Sabat Isambuli, first female doctor of Syria, Mary Putnam. This right here is, I'm going to butcher her name, but it looks like Amitabh Joshi. She was also very famous in India, died very, very young. And then Kai Oklahoma, first woman in Japan. Also the first Native American woman. Anne Preston became the first female dean of a medical school. Notice that they have them in their traditional outfits for these three. They made a lot of mileage out of these women. Women came from across the world to the Philadelphia school. I mean, Russia, all over Europe, obviously, Asia as well, Middle East. Okay, in the New York school founded by Clements, there's the right saying that. It had the work with that hospital the Blackwells came up with. I love the fact that AI said this was a picture of women sewing. I'm like, you couldn't be more wrong. Yay, AI. They want AI to be my doctor. They can't tell it's dead bodies laying here. Okay? Again, it was closed after World War I because, again, a lot of schools were not allowing women in. How to squeeze her in? How to squeeze her in? There's Jacoby, very important woman. I just wanted you to see what she looked like. Okay? First woman to study in the University of Paris. First woman to get a pharmacy degree. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for being here. Way more than I expected, and big thanks to Professor Kevin Funk and Donna Martin for taking over my classes for me. Okay?
Oh, that's right.
And you're right. Yeah, that's right. So thank you. By the way, if you want to see this and just ask me, send me an email. This was a school over in England. Except instead of 700 people, 1,500 showed up, busted out the windows, tore down the gates because the Royal Society of Science was going to let women in. Today, this hashtag was trending a few years back. Looks like a surgeon. 50% of us are doctors. The pay gap is enormous because doctors are all salaried down and we make a lot less. We still have some ways to go. Thank you guys for coming.